We'll go over some of the geology of the Marcellus and the Utica formations so that you can understand why gas companies are interested in New York State. We'll also go through the technological process of fracking, just the basics, and then we'll hit some of the impacts.
Fracking is a very small part of a much larger problem. Remember, the myth was fracking is 60 years old, it's well proven, what are you worried about? But the kind of thing we're talking about is not just fracking. It's a much bigger fracking, but it's in the context of spatially intense development involving clustered pads, many wells per pad. Each well is 100 times more consumptive of frac fluid and is producing on the order of 100 times more waste than any well you've ever seen in New York State. What they're doing has never been done in New York. It's only been done in the entire United States since 2007 in its entirety, and so they're still learning.
Once they have drilled down and fracked the well, they hook up some very, very large diesel pumps. They hook these things up together, and when they fire them up, typically it can produce about 9,000 or 10,000 pounds per square inch. And they pump fluid down into the well that they've just fracked. And the fluid typically has millions of gallons of water. You'll read typically 2 to 12, so 6 is about a reasonable figure for how much water it uses. Each well, not each well pad, uses about 6 million gallons of water. So what kind of chemicals do they use? Well, out of the 900 and something products that are used in the fracking, and when I say fracking, I mean the whole schmear from siting a well pad to completion. There's 900 and something products that are used, which contain 600 and something chemicals. And the chemicals are used for things like biocides, surfactants, friction reducers, corrosion inhibitors. There's all sorts of different things they're used for. And certainly not all 600 and something are used in every single well. Now, with these chemicals, it's been found, according to Theo Coburn, a noted expert on water issues and biochemistry, at least half of the chemicals known to be present in fracking fluid are toxic. Many of them are carcinogens, neurotoxins, endocrine disruptors, and mutagens. But Coburn estimates that about 1/3 of the chemicals in fracking fluid remain unknown to the public. These are kept as trade secrets. When they find out that they can get essentially salt, even though it's in a liquid form, at a much cheaper rate, a lot of municipalities go for that. Gets sprayed on the roads in the winter as a de-icer, also gets sprayed on dirt roads and gravel roads in the summer to keep the dust down. The problem is that material, as I said, has things like arsenic, barium, other heavy metals, and it also has radioactive particles in it. Here's a map of New York State with the towns and counties shown, and right now we have about 170 villages, towns, and cities in New York State that have enacted bans or moratoria on fracking.
If you're a landowner right now and you would like to start producing shale gas from your property, that's the last thing you want to do. You ain't going to make any money. You might have got a signing bonus for leasing, but you ain't going to get any royalties. The use of multi-well pads and cluster drilling reduces surface impacts. You now know what a multi-well pad is. It's a pad from which there are many wells, not one, many. 5, 10, 15, 20. And you know what cluster drilling means. Roughly uniform array of pads clustered on the surface so that you can access all the gas that you can possibly get out of a wide area of shale. Let me show you from Pennsylvania and from West Virginia what typical operations look like. Here's a 5-well pad. These wells have been drilled and fracked. These are vestigial ponds that were first used to store fresh water, then used to store drilling mud, and then later used to store flowback. That's the fluid that comes back up the well after the frack job, flowback fluid, which is later then called brine, and then later called produced water. So when you hear about brine spreading, it's flowback spreading. Flowback, the exact second that an operator declares a well in operation, in production, what was being called flowback automatically by regulation in Pennsylvania is called brine. It's still fluid that's flowing back out of the well.
In order to supply 6 million gallons or so of water to a well, it takes a lot of trucks. So if you take that and you do a little math, so if there's 6 wells per pad, that means you're up to 7,200 truck trips per pad. And then if you figure 200,000 wells, that's 33,000 pads. That's if they frack New York to the level that they would expect to over the next 50 years. You're talking about 238 million truck trips.
There's always something coming up, even the last day that the well is in production. It might only be a gallon or two, but there's always something coming up with the gas. Some fluid. It just comes up at decreasing rates. But the longer it's been down there, the longer it's been absorbing what's been down there. So the chemical makeup of what comes up is constantly changing. So the rate at which it comes up is decreasing, the concentration of the bad stuff is increasing. Which is why, if we now declare what's coming back up brine, in some cases you can get a beneficial use permit and use it for road spreading.
And it contains all the stuff they sent down there. It also contains different elements and compounds that were down in that rock that it dissolved or pulled up with it. And it can be particles, it can be actually materials in solution, but it includes heavy metals like arsenic and barium. Also, as we'll find out later, it includes a lot of radionuclides. The black shales are notorious for being radioactive. That's the way that they tell where the Marcellus and Utica shales and other black shales are down in the well. They essentially lower a Geiger counter and do a gamma ray count, and areas where it spikes, they know that's where the black shale layers are. So these things are notorious for being much more radioactive than typical rock. The Energy Policy Act of 2005, which for oil and gas exploration and production exempts parts of 7 major federal environmental laws, exempts the fracking for oil and gas from those 7 major laws. So there are things that are going on with fracking that would not be allowed for any other industry. What these guys were doing before the accident happened was they were transferring brine from one tank to another. That's what they call the flowback fluid, brine, because it is very salty. But it also has a lot of other materials in it. And unbeknownst to them, this batch had benzene in it and other hydrocarbons, volatile hydrocarbons. So as they were transferring this and they had left one of the truck engines running, all those volatile chemicals got into the air inside this open shed. And what happened, according to witnesses, was because this stuff is chemically a lot like vaporized gasoline, those truck engines that were idling revved up on their own because all of a sudden they had a lot more fuel in the air and backfired, and that caused an explosion. And ultimately 3 workers were killed in this. If it wasn't for that Halliburton loophole, that truck could not have just been called brine. In Pennsylvania, a law was passed making things called gag orders the law of the land, which means that if you're experiencing some of these symptoms in Pennsylvania and you go to your doctor, he can't tell you what he thinks is causing that. Now he can, under the law, go to the gas company that might be drilling near you and say, hey, what chemicals are you using? And they are supposed to give him a list. He is under orders not to divulge that list, not to patients. He can't even call up other doctors to get their opinions on this. If he knows of another doctor that has a patient with similar symptoms, he can't say, hey, here's what I found out. That same law exempts the gas industry from telling the community people, the fire department, EMTs, town officials, what chemicals they're using.
Long-term noise, dust, and light pollution from the pads while they're drilling and fracking. That might elongate out to years. NOx emissions from all the diesel engines that are running. Higher probabilities of spills of frac fluid when you're dealing with millions or tens of millions of gallons on a pad, transporting back and forth and storing, the probability of a spill goes up. And venting and accidental emissions of produced gases.
One of the arguments I often get is that, well, everybody should have the right to do with their property as they see fit. The problem is, it's never just on your property. First of all, contamination, noise, all that, none of that adheres to property boundary lines. And certainly when you have several thousand truck trips coming onto your property, your neighbors notice some of that too. It's changed everything all right, says Pam Judy, a resident of Carmichael's. Her now unsellable dream home sits 780 feet downwind of 3 enormous gas compressors, which appeared in 2009. It sounds like helicopters in the backyard, she says. The fumes make me dizzy. My children get headaches and nosebleeds. I feel it's very prudent for municipalities to have some type of ban or moratorium on fracking as a second layer of defense, so that if New York does lift the ban or the moratorium, then the town or city or village is still protected. They can always lift those bans or moratoria, but once fracking starts, it's incredibly difficult to enact a ban or moratorium. If you take a look where the gas industry is, they're ignoring something called the precautionary principle. And that principle states that if you're not pretty sure that you can do something pretty safely, then you shouldn't do it. So the question is, has fracking shown us enough red flags that we should use that precautionary statement and we should hold off, slow down, whatever you want to call it, bans, moratoria?